man, the things I go through for you guys. You guys, all of you. I know how to do this stuff. Apparently you guys don't. Anyway, through the years, I have been asked a couple of times how to build a bench. If a bench should go inside or outside of the shower, blah, blah, blah. A lot of different questions on building a bench, specifically in a shower. So I went out of my way and I spent about 50 bucks on some lumber that I will reuse. I normally use a nail gun with 3.5-inch nails. But in this case I use some galvanized 3-inch nails, screws, which I will take out and reuse on other jobs that I have, as well as this lumber. This will not go to waste. But I had some downtime and I figured I would go ahead and show a bench. The reason why is because my helper, my apprentice, was a little upset that I did not show him how to build a bench on the last job we did. So I set up a wall in a short form, meaning that this is not the exact dimensions of a wall, nor are these 16 inches on center, because I'm not going to go through all of that, but you get the gist of what's going on. I'm going to take this out for a minute because there's a reason for that to be there. So this would be the inside back end of your shower, meaning the shower head would be over in that direction. And this is the wall setup that you would typically have. So maybe this would be the curb of your shower, and it would extend out, and you would have 3 2x4s sitting up here, and so you'd walk inside of your shower, and voila, you would have a bench sitting in front of you. Or in most cases, what happens is I do tub to shower conversion, and in which case this is an open area, so I have these screws in toe-nailed, and I will pull those out momentarily because more often than not I'm doing a bench that is faced out of the shower. And for that reason alone, I toe-nailed those in so that I could slide this out. However, it really wouldn't matter. You're going to replicate what I'm going to show you on the back end over here on the front end if this was a closed wall situation. And I will get to that, so don't lose your memory. Put a bookmark in your brain about what I'm talking about here, because that's going to come out. But again, this will be... You know what? I'm going to jump ahead for a minute. My bench, my curb bench that I built already, I prefabbed the bench because I don't want to go through... I could sit there and I could put the camera up on my tripod and I could point it down and I could speed the process along with me actually cutting the wood and screwing and nailing and all that stuff, but I find that extremely boring when I watch somebody do something, and apparently there's a lot of YouTubers that enjoy watching other people work. I'm not one of those guys, nor do I like having people watch me work necessarily. Anyway, for the purposes of this video, because I'm jumping ahead here, this would normally be another situation if you were to have an enclosed area. Then this 2x4 would actually go 8 foot up, and I would, it's hard to explain on a mock-up, but this would go 8 foot up, and my drywall is not quite 8 foot, but even if my drywall wasn't up at the top, I would secure this in place. I would toe-nail on the sides of there and toe-nail on the top, but normally I have sheetrock up on the top end, and then I would just put a couple of screws into the sheetrock into the 2x4. That would anchor it there, and then I would anchor it up front here. In fact, I already did a couple of pre-drilled holes there so that I could toe-nail something in. So if you were in a situation where you had an enclosed area like I currently have, then you would toe-nail another 2x4. And then, for the purposes that I have, I like my board out like this. I don't like it sideways like that because it doesn't give me enough girth. I would have to have 2 boards side by side in order to make that happen. So I just prefer it like that. But you would replicate it over on this side too, because ultimately what this is going to be is your anchoring for your bench. So you're going to have something both for your bench to anchor to and for your sheetrock, your wallboard, or whatever you use to extend on from that point. So in other words, you need some bite with a 2x4 here, but it's specifically meant to be an anchoring stud, and that's what it's there for. So I'm going to put it there temporarily. And I will toe-nail that in. I will show that toe-nail and a screw into there to get that anchored. But at the same time I'm going to take this out because we're pretending, again, this is a tub to shower conversion. So this is an open face type of shower. And it wouldn't matter if it was a tub to shower conversion or if it was just a very deep shower. Either which way, it doesn't really matter. So getting back to the point. So this would be a wall. These studs would be 16 inches on center, typically, sometimes. You would have 2 of the studs in the center, or sorry, at the end. But center of that you would have another stud, and that's to facilitate both your wallboard on both sides being, yeah, so that's typically what you're looking at. Sometimes there's not a stud in there, and sometimes guys like to put their pan liner into that crease and fold it in there. I'm not one of those guys that like to do that. I'd still do the hospital corners. I just don't feel like that's secure enough to have that pan liner flopping back there in the corner. But that's just me, and that's a side note. So getting back to the job at hand. So then you have your opposing wall over here that is also 16 in on center or whatever the case is. Your bench isn't going to be 16 inches long, because that's going to be, again, your anchoring stud, and you would also have that here. Am I redundant or what? I just want to make sure everybody understands this. So back in the day when I first started building benches, I have a bunch of 2x4s, and I used to try and manipulate all my 2x4s and make a bench, and it used to be kind of a pain in the butt. So what I did going forward is I started using 2x6s, and I already prefabbed a couple of 2x6s already. So I'm going to move over to this direction so you can see my final bench. This is my final bench. So the dimension on this, because this is a mock-up, this is 3 foot long. From end to the inside of that stud, that's 3 foot long. So my final bench is also 3 foot long from end to end. And if you could tell, it's all 2x6s. So it doesn't really matter what the dimensions is. I just happened to get it almost perfect there. Didn't even notice that because I didn't line them up. But it really wouldn't matter. You could actually do 1 stud in the middle. You don't have to do 2. I like to overkill. I usually have more lumber and more time than I need, so I always do a couple of cross members there, if you will. But you definitely need the pieces on both ends, and that's because that's the anchoring portion. So this this final is 3 foot long, as I've already mentioned, and it is about. So I have this chair over here, and if you notice, most chairs, and sometimes I actually use something like this. This is about more or less about 15 inches wide. So this is 11 1/4. But if I wanted to make it 15 inches or bigger, then I could use these. These would be the little spacers in between. So I'm trying to do this with one hand. So right now I'm at 11. This is a 4-inch piece, 12, 13, 14, 15. So this would be, instead of 11 1/4, this would be 15 1/4 right there. So I'd have 3 of those going on. I would have one at the end, one in the middle, and one at the end over there. And then I'm toe-nailing. I'm pre-drilling some holes, and you can see the back end of it. I'm pre-drilling some holes so that I can fasten it in there and get it nice and tight. As you can see, there's enough bite on these screws. I think these are actually 2-inch screws, 2 1/4, I believe. You could use a longer screw if you wanted to. There's all kinds of different ways, techniques, but either which way, all you have to do is bring those 2 pieces together, and voila, you have 15 inches. I think 15 inches personally is way too wide. Most showers is going to take up so much of your room in the shower that I usually prefer about a 12-inch. This is 11 1/4, but by the time it gets wrapped with wallboard and tile and all that stuff, it'll bump out from that measurement probably another inch or so. So now you've got a 12, more or less 12 1/4, 12 1/2 inch bench at the end. And that's what I'm going to do. Now, jumping ahead again, this is a piece of lumber, obviously, that I used from another job. So if I bump these back in, right? So now I go from my 11 1/4 to probably, well, I can measure this. I think this is a 2x10. Yeah, 2x10. So 2x10s are not true 2x10s. This is 9 1/4. So you could use, you don't have to go through all this trouble. This is more than enough width to sit on. So you could use one of these 2x10 or larger if you wanted to. So you don't necessarily have to use that dimension. This one that I have here, I'm showing this because this is typically what I do. I have more 2x6s than I ever buy 2x10s. But if you wanted to, you could just do one section like this. Instead of the 2 sections I have and put them together, you could just do one section. And so the end result would be the same way. You would have one 2x10, whatever size you decided, on the floor. Then you would have a second one that runs the same length on the top, and then on the end, and 2 in the middle, same as this. And then that would be much easier than building 2 of these. But again, because I have more 2x6s than I ever buy of this, by default, I always do 2x6s. And because I just feel like 11 1/4 is a little too thin, I want it to be about 15. So that's why I normally, or at least the last job anyway, I put these little scab pieces in the middle. And how you set it up and how you do it exactly is not really relevant. I guess what I'm trying to get at is building a bench and a shower is not difficult at all. Not showing the process is irrelevant because this is nothing more than like a miniature framed wall for all intents and purposes. If you look at this as an 8-foot long section instead of a little 3-foot, then this is basically how you have a header, you have bottom plate, and then you have the studs in the middle. So that's all you're doing. Like literally, that's all you're doing. Now, the anchoring part, this is where it gets a little more complicated for the mock-up purposes because I don't have a wood floor to nail into. But the anchoring definitely happens on those bottom 2 plates to your subfloor. If you had a concrete situation like I have here, say in a basement, then you would use what I call, I'm going to get flack for this, a bang gun. Because that's how it was introduced to me back 25, 30 years ago. A bang gun will literally put a 3.5 inch nail right through the 2x4 and into the concrete. So you would use a bang gun, but you would still anchor these nevertheless. So they would go in side by side or with the spacer in there, and then you would anchor down the bottom part first, and then you would anchor, yeah. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead, and having a couple of drills is always beneficial because, you know, again, I'm doing my little pre-drill holes there, and then I have my different bits for my different screws and stuff like that. So on this one, whoops, I don't have the right bit. Yes, I do. No, I don't. Where's my other bit at? Okay. So, yeah, having a couple of drills on hand with full battery is always beneficial. It's also highly advised that you do pilot holes, because when you get this close to the wood, 99% of the time you're going to split the wood. And I think I went underneath. I went underneath. I think I toe-nailed a couple of these up underneath too, so I'm going to go off. So that part is finished. Now, again, imagine that you have an opening like this, which is very, very typical. I do more of these in the closed section that I just took off. So, you would put in one of your pre-formed, yes, do this outside of the shower. It's so much easier to do this outside of the shower. So you put in your pre-formed section first. Then, and because typically I don't use screws, so I have 3-inch deck screws, which won't rust. So you're going to put on the outside and inside into your floor at least 2 of these going across. Now I go overkill with almost all of my jobs, so I'm going to put in a couple, well, I use nails, but I'm going to put in a couple of screws here. I'm going to put in a couple of screws here, a couple of screws here, a couple of screws at the end. Then I'm going to see on the inside of here, because I'm using 2x6s, I have all kinds of room. I could have this screw this far out and still be able to reach one of those studs on the inside of here. If you really, really wanted to, you could probably put 4 or 5 screws along here. It's not necessary because ultimately you're already anchored here. You're trying to anchor to the wall. You're trying to anchor to here. So I would put a pilot hole here, and I would anchor it to this stud, pilot hole here, anchor it to that stud. And there's, again, you can put brackets in here, you can do all different things. But ultimately what you're looking at is trying to anchor this as much as you can. And I'm going to, I said I wouldn't do this. Showing my work. So the pilot really doesn't have to go through all the way. Where's my other drill? The pilot doesn't have to go all the way through. I'm going to take off this bit and put on the Phillips because I'm going to be using these long screws. The pilot doesn't have to go all the way through. All it has to do is go through the first piece of wood. And then it's going to hit the end piece very easily. Now, Just that one screw secures that in place really, really well. That's why I said if you wanted to, 4, 5, 6 screws if you wanted to. And if this was a real job, I'd probably use at least 3. One at the bottom, middle, and top. Same as over here. If you wanted to, you could shore up some other 2x4s, and you could over-engineer this thing big time. But in the end, it doesn't matter. The anchoring at the bottom and the anchoring on the end is the most important thing. Again, doing a pilot hole like this, and I'm going to use a shorter screw. So I'm going to use a shorter screw on this, which means I have to change out this drill bit because these bits have a little star on them. So I'm going to do it this way. And then putting the screw in there to get it to anchor into that stud. Very, very easy to do. And boom, it's flush, it's all the way through, it ain't going nowhere. And one at the end here too would go in there. And the same thing would apply. Oh, sorry, my bad. So you're going to measure, hold on a second, let me put that back so I don't confuse you guys. You're going to measure the end of here. That's an important measurement right there because that end is where half of your stud is going to go. And I'm going to have to do this off camera because I have this stud facing that way and I'm going to need 2 hands. So that's the end of the bench. You're going to need about part of that for your wallboard and you're going to need part of that for your actual bench to anchor to. So that's about where you want to go, about halfway. And I'm going to go ahead and screw that in. So I went ahead and countersunk these screws on the inside. If you wanted to, you could do sideways. If I have a nail gun, I'm usually doing sideways anyway, and I have a very long nail, longer than these screws are going to be. So this is going to be very secure in place. And again, if you wanted to, you could also do it sideways and put a couple of them so that you have enough girth on both ends. You know, so for example, if you put these sideways, you would have one next to that. That would be your center point. This part would be for your wallboard. That part would be for anchoring your bench. Either which way, as long as it works, that's all that matters. There's really, honestly, no right or wrong way with regard to doing almost everything out there. There's no right or wrong way. Whatever works for you. In the end, that's what matters the most. So that's flush up against the bottom there, against the bottom plate, and then I just run some screws right through there. Again, you saw how that pulled, you know, because of the end of the screw, it pulled right into that. So, I mean, that's solid. Like right now, it would need nothing else except what's going on here. That's very, very solid in an open environment like this. So that is a very solid bench, which, where's my tape measure? 11 and about an 8 is the final result. About 11 and an 8. And with another inch on there, it'd be about 12 and a quarter or so. And more than enough room to sit on. More than enough room to sit on. Again, putting the spacers in there is optional if you wanted to. And I'm sure there's other ways to put in spacers. In fact, you could actually scab in. If I had I could use one of these. So many ways. One of the things about carpentry is it's almost like tile. You can manipulate tile. Well, you can manipulate wood a lot easier than tile. But because this is a creative form, there's no rules. So if you wanted to, you could actually, you don't have to put them on top the way I showed you before. You could put them up in the bottom. And you could have nothing at the top if you so desired. So I have a 2-inch gap, which now creates, instead of 11 and an 8, I have 12, 13 and an 8 going across. And I can do a quick measurement to confirm that. Yeah, 13, right on. Not quite an 8. Yeah, about 13 going across. And I did kind of a half-assed measurement, so I'm probably about 1/8 of an inch off. But the point being, without the middle piece, I'm still very solid with these bottom pieces anchored in like this. This is going nowhere, and you saw how I I did a pilot hole here, along here. Now, the only difference that I would do is I would move this over to here. In fact, at this point, I would probably just build up another couple or 2 or 3 2x4s up against this stud, because it just makes the anchoring process a lot easier. But it doesn't really matter in the end, as long as you have something for your wallboard to attach to, and you have your bench anchored down. And then, of course, the other option is with the spacing that I did, or that I showed you earlier, which is a little more difficult. This might be easier for a DIYer than rather than doing this. I have a third one, which I didn't do any pilot holes in there, but that could easily fit right beside the top. Why bother with a hammer when you have your palm? So yeah, now we have a 15-inch bench, which is the same width as this chair. Very, very, very large area. So this is an option also. Again, there's probably all kinds of different ways to make this happen. This is relatively easy for me. The only difference, again, even more so, if that stud was 16 inches on center, you're going to put a couple more studs there prior to putting your bench in, because you're going to know what your measurement is, and you're going to make sure you have enough girth in there to facilitate anchoring. Although if this was already there, it wouldn't really matter, because in the end, the whole thing is anchored from the bottom, anchor from the back end over here, and then you're just putting in side anchors. Very, very solid. Like this already had a slight slope. My bubble would definitely be toward the back over there. Could you do that? Could you intentionally slope your bench prior to putting any wallboard or tile in, so that all your tile is flat rather than the tile being sloped down to an end with the back end being higher? Yeah, you could do that. And in this case, it probably unintentionally is sloped in that direction. The way that I'm seeing it has a slight slope going on. Yeah, you could do that. It's not something that I focus on, because again, I can manipulate so many other areas of this before the wallboard is ever done. Now, if this was a real shower, at this point is when I would do my cross pieces, where I don't have any 2x6 left, but anyway, my cross pieces of 2x6 would now go in here, my scabbing, if you will. Scabbing here, scabbing there, scabbing there, scabbing everywhere there's an opening, because my pan liner would go up next. So yeah, to answer any questions out there, the bench should always be outside of the shower. This is at a point where the pan liner goes in. And yes, you could wrap the whole pan, another question I get, you could wrap your whole pan liner, have enough of it to go all the way around and up the wall if you wanted to, or just up around the bench. I don't really see the point of doing that. My pan liner goes no further than how much pan liner I have. It could be 8 inches, it could be 10, 12, whatever, but the pan liner goes up, your mortar bed goes inside of here, you know, wrapped around the curve, blah, blah, blah. And so that if you ever have a leak with your bench, if you've done something wrong on your bench to cause a leak, or conversely, done something wrong with your shower, that you don't have to tear out the whole thing. If you build your bench within the shower, which I don't know how you would do with wood anyway, but if you did all your shower pan and your shower pan mortar and then built a bench, say it was concrete or something like that, and you had a failure of the bench somehow, now everything has to come out, rather than just focusing on that part which is the problem. And that's why I always, always recommend doing your benches outside of your shower. So this is where your pan liner would go in. I know I'm being redundant, but I have to explain. It seems like I have to explain things over and over and over. So in addition to this being very, very, and this is an outside application and I'm shaking on it and nothing's moving hardly, but this is an outside application where I'm not even anchored to the floor, right? So in addition to this, once everything, all your wallboard, oh, by the way, wallboard. I'm going to use a little scrap piece of wood here. So this would be your wallboard. Your wallboard would encompass the whole width and length of the bench. And then the wall proper would overlap on top of that. And that would go all the way around like that, right? And the same thing goes for this. This wallboard would go first along here before you ever put the top piece in, because you want the overlap, you want the edge of your wallboard showing. You want the overlap of your wallboard like this, right? So that's another thing. And the wallboard and the tile, if there's any instability whatsoever in your bench, the wallboard and the tile will make everything kind of tied together and be very stable. So there is that too. Anyway, I hope that helps. If there's any other questions that you have, make sure that you put them below in the comment section. I'll try and answer them the best I can. I can't imagine what questions there would be left after this horribly long explanation. But as I said, everybody has their own way. As long as it works for you, that's all that matters. This is the bench. They wanted a bench in here, and just for your information, people ask me about benches all the time. I always, my personal preference, I always build my bench outside of the shower. Outside of the shower. So if there's any problem with the shower pan ever, you don't have to dismantle the bench. If there's ever a problem with the bench, you don't have to dismantle the shower pan. So that's just my preference, and it actually will shorten this shower by about 15 inches by almost 4 feet. Benches can be built different ways. I want to talk about this a little bit because I do get a lot of questions about it. I started building my benches out of 2x6 a long time ago. It just was easier than 2x4. It's a lot more solid, sturdy, and all that stuff. And it's going to get wrapped with Durarock as well as everything's going to be red guarded as I normally do. Shower pan liner will go up however much it goes, but you can see how much extra pan liner from the other job that I have left over. So I'll only take it up to about here. I'm not going to wrap it up and around and all that stuff the way I see some people do. As long as you waterproof all this stuff as much as you can, then this is no different than than anything else. People freak out about benches, and yes, they do fail sometimes. Even with a block bench, they do fail. I've pulled out blocks that are saturated with water because they put the block inside of the pan. And there's other ways they can fail, but it's not a matter of what you make your bench out of. It's a matter of how you prep the shower before you put the tile on. Took probably an hour, yeah, about a little bit over an hour to make, and then less than 10 minutes to disassemble. So there you are. That's it. That's all the material that you're going to need. Pretty simple, isn't it?
That was easy.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video and you learned something, consider being a Patreon member. $5, $10, $15 a month would help me greatly produce more videos. I make nothing from YouTube at all. If you're going to call me for advice, please donate $50 for 30 minutes. My link to my PayPal and my Patreon account is down below. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get immediate notifications as soon as I post videos. And thank you very much for your support.